State Board of Elections steps in, I think, does the right thing.
The Dan Yorke State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Taco Comfort Solutions.
At least on one matter, in East Providence, they are cuckoo. The common sense, I don't know, they've had water issues there in East Providence. There might be something serious going on there, but thankfully, cooler heads prevailed after a Hummel report focused in on election terms there, and the State Board of Elections actually took an aggressive stance, meddled properly in the situation, and I think, you know, figuratively kind of slapped everybody around and got them all straight. A board member will be here to talk about that this evening. Great to have you in on this Wednesday evening. It is a pleasure to have you aboard. Let's get to some of the stuff that's out there in the world. Little bit of rope-a-dope going on here with Kim Jong-un. Looks like he's not necessarily all in on this party between he and America and Donald Trump, right? That's the headline. Here's a note from the network.
The sudden withdrawal was in response to annual combined South Korean and U.S. military drills, similar to this one conducted last year. The Pentagon calls them routine and purely defensive.
They're exercises that are legal, they're planned well in advance.
The North appeared to show goodwill last week. 3 American detainees were released, and a promise was made to dismantle its nuclear site later this month.
Is the summit still on?
The White House says it's examining North Korea's comments.
All right, so this is a pre-scheduled exercise between we and South Korea, and North Korea is like, whoa, what's going on there? We just gave you 3 prisoners. This is all about the dance. And to his credit, and almost surprisingly, at least at press time, we record this program early in the afternoon. Gosh knows how the phone might be burning in the palm of the president's hand, but at least this morning he was very disciplined and not taking the bait and not really saying much about it, doing the time will tell, we will see routine, which is apt. If anybody thought this was going to be smooth, they're mistaken. If anybody thought that Kim Jong-un was just going to roll over, they're mistaken. If anybody thought that we actually had our collective act together, knew exactly what we were doing here, Mike Pompeo aside, we're mistaken. So, you know, strap on. Let's come home and talk about something that we had on the program yesterday. The Senate last night went ahead and okayed the auto body shop backed repair bill, as the headline reads. And what this is really all about is a battle between the insurance industry and the auto body industry as to how long the extension should be to prohibit the use of aftermarket parts when you get into a crash. The current law is 30 months. So you get all banged up and you bring the car in and they replace, you know, whatever they got to replace from the fender to whatever might happen. Well, how about that? I forgot to go on silent. Let's just that doesn't happen often. You know why I forgot to go on silent? Because I was on the phone with Verizon all morning long because my voicemail evaporated and an email won't stop trying to run. The lady was very helpful, but 2 hours. Huh?
Is anyone good?
No, it wasn't fixed. It was not fixed. I was saying that the auto body bill extends from 30 months to 48 months, the time period prohibiting the insurance industry from using aftermarket parts or mandating that the auto body folks do. The insurance guy and the representative for the auto body were here last night.
The problem here in Rhode Island is that it's a very expensive place to buy insurance. We're a dense state, we crash into each other a lot, and it costs us a lot more to repair a vehicle here in Rhode Island than it does pretty much anywhere else.
We have been supporting consumer protection legislation for years. We believe that any law that gives consumers a choice and information can't be wrong. There's no difference in this bill this year in that consumers can choose the aftermarket part if they want. That is their option. This is not about body shops making more money. In fact, there is a markup on parts and aftermarket parts and OEM parts, approximately 25%.
The auto body lobby is very strong here in Rhode Island, and the insurance business seems to be always chasing the tail of the auto body business. I am quite certain that this, well, let's put it this way, it'll be one of those things that might be traded between the House and the Senate because that's what they do. But for the most part, it looks like the auto body business is going to prevail. To the newest excitements, it's like politically orgasmic around here, this sports betting situation that we have running around. The headline here now, okay, I think everybody needs to take a deep breath. In the space of about 72 hours, we have had a Supreme Court decision. We have had a rush to legislation in the Senate. Don't forget, the governor wholly irresponsibly included $23 million of revenue from sports gambling in the budget before the Supreme Court of the United States of America even adjudicated a case that would allow states to get into this business. Wholly irresponsible, just incredibly stupid. And now we are setting ourselves an arbitrary, well, not arbitrary because we've got a $23 million put to fill, right? October 1st deadline to get into the business of sports gambling. And I'll tell you, the Senate President couldn't be more excited about this.
We have two facilities here that I think that we can use for sports gaming almost immediately, and I'm hoping that will happen, and then we can look at other methods of sports gaming as far as internet gaming or any other kind of sports that take place in using satellite facilities and things like that. So that comes later, but this is something that we could do immediately.
So the sports leagues are looking each for a 0.25% cut of the revenue. The NFL hasn't weighed in yet, but already in Rhode Island, the sports leagues are in here with professional lobbyists at that building trying to wedge their way into this deal with what they call an integrity fee. Now, I have to tell you something. That's one of the funniest things I've ever heard. You want to talk about an oxymoronic term. They want more money to protect the integrity of their products, as if they're actually going to funnel that money into the the policing of the. It's not going to happen. I mean, they'll set up an office somewhere, but Rhode Island would be contributing, according to the projections. Somebody came up with an $800 million take for the state of Rhode Island to be split amongst all the players, including Twin River, Tiverton. You know, a couple of $1 million a year would go to the sports leagues. The NFL hasn't crushed in here yet. Thankfully, there are some interesting slow responses on this, like the good governor of Massachusetts. You may have heard of the place, and 40% of our viewers actually are from there. Guess what? Your governor said, I think we need to take a deep breath and look at this. We already have casino operations about ready to begin, and we need to evaluate this, and the sports will be there. He's right. He's right. We have to answer a constitutional question about this. I think there's ambiguity in terms of the 3 gaming category, gaming 3 or whatever the heck they call it, that you allegedly knew you were voting on, which you had no idea you were voting on in 2014 when you allowed table games at the Twin River Casino. And there's a whole bunch of other process and bureaucratic necessity that has to be developed here. An October 1st deadline. It's amazing what can't go and what can go. When direct revenue is flowing into the state, let me tell you something, and there's a grab, you know, it's warp speed. By the way, how's the Paul Sox legislation doing? All right, let's move on to the subject at hand. So this was the headline that started it all, caught my attention. Jim Hummel with the Hummel Report asked this question, if it was a foregone conclusion that councilors in East Providence could extend their terms. Well, guess what? The State Board of Elections got involved, and you get another headline which says, no, not going to happen that way. The executive summary on this case, and then we'll talk a little bit more about it, comes from former District Court Judge Stephen Erickson, who is a board member of the Rhode Island Board of Elections, who I think was catalytic in getting the board involved in this. Welcome to the show.
Well, great to be here.
Nice to have you. You watched this from, I would say afar, but you're
Middletown.
From Middletown. Okay, you watched the initial coverage, the Hummel conversation, and a lot of the stuff that we probably did on the radio and following this whole thing. And you didn't need to be asked. You said, you know what, this board needs to get into this conversation, right?
That's absolutely true. And I started immediately having conversations with our executive director and our legal counsel, Ray Mercatio, about it as soon as that report hit the public press, because it was important that there be a clear, determinative answer done quickly by an organization that had authority over the whole state. So we know that this isn't going to happen again, that there's a rule in place and that the board's going to enforce the rules.
I'm going to dig into the actual specificity of the case here in a moment, but what was interesting about all this was that the Attorney General was peppered on it, didn't respond. You know, it wasn't until there was some significant press and discussion that anybody in officialdom came running, and to your credit again, you came into this whole thing, and in what I think is a rare Rhode Island fashion, short-circuited a problem that could have been a lengthy argument and a mess at the electorate.
We're trying to make that less rare.
But it is rare.
It is rare.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. When we come back, we'll talk exactly about what happened and what the expectations were for at least a handful of elected officials in East Providence. In the meantime, let me tell you that your banking business is right in the palm of your hand with the Card Valet app from Navigant Credit Union. Simply download the Card Valet app with an account open at Navigant Credit Union, online at navigantcu.org, and you will find all the banking sophistication you'd ever want to have with you while you're traveling. Even though my phone ain't working that good, my Card Valet app still works. We'll be right back.
Came from a former councilwoman who basically said what happened. And, you know, we couldn't get any answers as to what happened. I mean, we had an election. I mean, Dan, think about how crazy that is for a second. You have more than half of the city of East Providence voted for 4-year terms, and then it was just gone, like it never happened.
That's Michael Ferry, a councilman in East Providence, who was one of the, I don't know, in my mind, suspects in this case. One of 3 councilors. Mr. Mattiello, another councilor, I thought was reasonable, though we leaned toward the idea of just extending their council terms. Long story short, there was a referendum in 2012 in East Providence that was answered affirmatively by the people who came out to extend council and school committee terms in East Providence from 2 to 4 years, correct? Right. But they never did it. They ran an election in 2014 for 2 years. They ran an election in 2016 for 2 years. And I guess there was a lot of General Assembly interaction with the city during that time, but nobody pulled the trigger and nothing was formalized, right?
Correct. The charter was not, the charter amendments weren't approved by the legislature. As it turns out that for school committee, because of the nature of the school committee and state law, those charter amendments would have to be approved by the legislature for the school committee, but not for the council because they have a home rule charter. So those should have taken effect immediately, and clearly it was a deficiency in the system there that led to them continuing to have 2-year terms.
Yeah, looking to get ratified by the General Assembly on the council side was not necessary.
Was not necessary. That's the position of the Solicitor for East Providence, as well as our attorney at the board.
So all this going on, it just kind of comes up as we head toward the 2018 election. Hey, listen, back in 2012, the people said, you know, 4-year term, so why don't we just make it that way? Yeah, we won't run an election in 2018. We'll come back for re-election in 2016. And it looked like the majority of the council, 3 out of the 5, were headed in that direction until, you know, Hummel, you know, wrote a story and we started standing on our head about it, and then your Board of Election got involved in it, thankfully. Right? I mean, the basic premise is
we do good once in a while.
The people in 2016 voted and it said 2-year term.
Yeah.
You got to deliver what they were promised, right?
Yes.
When you saw this, it was like you were very good with me on the radio. You wouldn't give me a definitive answer because of due process.
Right.
But it was as plain as the nose on our collective faces.
In retrospect, now that we're finished with it,
yeah,
I was appalled. I was absolutely appalled by this, that somebody who's in an existing office would say, we don't have to run this year, without taking it to the Board of Canvassers or the Board of Elections or to get a definitive answer. Of course, the Board of Canvassers in East Providence only had 1 member, so they didn't even have a functional board. So it was a mess. And so somebody has to come in and fix a mess. So
yes. And so you did.
So we did.
The resolve is that there will be an election in 2018 in East Providence, but it will be for 4 years.
That's correct.
Duh. And they're going to elect a mayor there in East Providence for the first time for 4 years. And,
right.
Do you think they've learned their lesson there?
One never knows.
Is there a moral conclusion to this, or is it just, take care of it and onward?
I think there is some kind of conclusion to this, which is that people often look at their own self-interest and forget about the larger public interest, and don't understand sometimes how what they do or say will play out in the larger world, and they get contained in their own little environment, and I think that's what happened here.
So there are bubbles at the State House. There are bubbles in local government.
Absolutely.
There's lots of bubbles.
That's right. And somebody has to go in and pierce that bubble and say, hey, look at what's actually happening in the real world.
Okay. When we come back, while the State Board of Elections did a marvelous job on this, I don't think they did a marvelous job with the Speaker. We'll talk about that next.
Okay.
Picked out the wrong checkbook. They both had more than enough money in it, and we used the wrong account.
The Speaker broke the law. The Speaker did something illegal to get reelected. People up there who are making the law shouldn't also be breaking the law.
All right, well, yeah, in general, that's probably a pretty good principle. Brendan Bell, the state GOP chairman, and of course the Speaker of the House. So once upon a time, we've got headlines here that can show this this conversation. The Speaker of the House, in his last embattled 2016 election in District 15, he had two accounts running. One is Friends of Mattiello, which is the typical name for a personal political campaign account. Mm-hmm. The other is named
Leadership PAC,
which is a political action committee fund that is part of the power base of a speaker, where he gets a lot of money in, he doles it out to others to the maximum for each candidate, and it kind of runs the political operation of the House Speaker. Having those two accounts is perfectly legal, absolutely wonderful. Mm-hmm. Problem was, during 2015 into 2016 campaign, the limit from one campaign to another to give is $1,000, and he spent $73,000, meaning he was $72,000 over, because he says he simply used the wrong checkbook and used his political action committee money to cover expenses that were by law supposed to be covered by his specific campaign.
Correct.
Brandon Bell filed a charge. There was also another story that we'll get to in just a second regarding in-kind contribution confusion with a failed GOP candidate. What were you guys thinking?
What were we thinking?
You just had him replace the money, and don't do it again, go away.
Right.
Why?
Because that's consistent with what we do in most cases like this. This situation is unusual because it involves the Speaker of the House. But the question is, should we then treat him differently than any other individual who came in with a similar situation? We actually waived most of the fines for most of our campaign finance violations. Last year it was 5 out of 6 that the staff waived, out of 50 or 60. Most of them were waived. Most of the fines were waived every year.
And most of the financial currency was minimal.
Well,
most of it.
In some of those cases, yes, and some of them, no. So when you look at it as a situation, I understand that people disagree. And I have no problem with people disagreeing. And I have no problem with people saying, you did it wrong. I think it's a thing about which reasonable people can disagree. My feeling was that it was a consent order. There was an admission that he violated the law. There was a warning letter sent, and so he was treated like a first offender, because he was a first offender. So should we treat him more harshly because he's Speaker? That's an interesting question.
Well, I don't even know if it's the Speaker thing. The perpetual use of that campaign fund, the wrong campaign fund, it wasn't a $72,000 check, oops, wrong account. It was a cumulative amount of spending that went on. And one could say, in the short term, if you do the math and really apply yourself, I only got through pre-calc, you know, so I'm not exactly sure if I could make the point. But for a short period of time, there might have been a financial benefit in having one fund bleeding into another. I don't think the Speaker's dirty. I don't think the Speaker was trying to misuse his Political Action Committee funds. But it is, I don't think it's a 56 and a 55. I think it's a 64 and a 55, and maybe you write it down, or 75 and a 55, and you write it down to a smaller amount. But for him to walk away scot-free without a fine at all, I think sends a terrible message. And the, golly shucks, I used the wrong checkbook. Right. The sloppiness of that
is remarkable.
It is remarkable.
It is remarkable in terms of its sloppiness. But Brandon had it absolutely right. One of the things that, as a retired judge, I've had both Brandon and Nick Mattiello in front of me at one time or another as attorneys. So I'm very familiar with both of them, and I knew both of them in that context. And I just, and Brandon was right. There's an admission that the law was violated. That's the most important thing. There was an admission that the law was violated by Nick Mattiello, the candidate, by making these contributions or moving the money in this way. What does the fine, a $50, $100, $1,000 fine, add to that in terms of actual punishment? Because, if we'd imposed a fine, there would be some people who frankly would say, well, you should have referred him for criminal prosecution. In other words, for some
the slippery slope argument here.
Yeah, well, okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay, I won't.
The reason why he's very happy, and by the way, he hasn't handled it that way. He hasn't said, he may have in legal documentation admitted breaking the law, but for the most part, he shrugged his shoulders and said, look, we switched accounts. I made a mistake. It's an accounting error. His spin, I think, belies what you're saying right here, and you can't control what he says about what you adjudicate. But I just think that one of the things he doesn't want to have is a headline by a potential opponent is that he had to pay a fine, and he didn't have to. And John Marion from Common Cause actually said this about the case.
I've seen school committee members, town council members, who have done sloppy bookkeeping, which wasn't right, but they've had to pay out of their personal pocket, $500, $1,000. Sometimes they just make them pay the cost of the postage and the staff time it took to track them down to file their reports. He doesn't even have to pay the cost of the postage or the legal fees or any of the staff time. He just has to move money from one campaign to
So I'm not saying, okay. John's looking for, what is current postage stamp? I feel like George W. Bush 41 buying a carton of milk. I don't know. What is it?
I don't know. It's a forever stamp.
50,
I don't know how much I pay for
50 some odd cents. He makes that point, that there are others who've had to pay fines.
Well, yes, and because he comes to the board meetings and he sees the ones that are in front of the board, not the ones that are handled by staff. And when you look at the ones that are in front of the board, for example, somebody recently complained about the fact that they had to pay a $125 fine. So I looked into their case. They were 4 years late. They ignored us for 4 years. 39 notices were sent, including 13 certified mail notices to this individual that they never responded to.
All right. Well,
so yeah,
Your Honor,
$128 is good there.
I think maybe the moral of the story is the State Board of Elections is a little weak in its overall judicial, penal perspective.
We're trying to get compliance. We're trying to get people
That's
to
the
comply.
mission, compliance.
Compliance.
Not penalizing people for not being compliant.
Where we think that it's appropriate to do so, yeah. Right. Okay, we're gonna go back and forth.
And we're out of time.
Okay, but it's enjoyable.
It was good of you to come and share your thoughts. Good job in East Providence. 1 out of 2 ain't bad.
Hey, 50%.
Right, final word and we come back. Stay with us.
You know what they told.
Coming up on the program tomorrow night, a show that we actually recorded but you have not seen yet on the rail activity at Quonset and a special recreation train option for you on date night. I think you'll kind of like it. It's a lighter program. So we'll see you then tomorrow night. Don't forget the radio tomorrow at 3 until 6 on WPRO. Thanks for watching. Good night.